She had no name, or if she did, no one dared call her. She arrived without warning, without greeting, without a public record. The soldier entered the base like a ghost carried by the wind, and no one knew where she came from. But something about her made time seem slower, her steps too firm, her eyes too silent, her uniform too clean. It didn't fit in with that place or those people. And maybe it wasn't meant to. That first night, no one saw her eat. She didn't sit at the table with the others. She didn't respond to the younger recruits' taunts. When they asked her name, she just stared, as if listening for a sound the others couldn't hear. Then she lowered her eyes and kept walking, as if this wasn't her true destination. It was as if she were passing through, or keeping watch. In the barracks, she chose the bed closest to the door. Strategic, an exit position. She slept with her boots on and a knife hidden under her pillow, as if she didn't even trust the ceiling beneath her. Someone whispered, "She came from the shadow troops, that's for sure." Another countered, "Nobody survives that. She's just a misfit looking for attention." But no one dared confront her head-on. There was something about her that made even the most stern sergeant measure his words. When the base commander introduced her, he was curt. He simply said, "New assignment. Superior order. Code authorized." No explanation, no biography, just a number. Some laughed, others were suspicious. But everyone chose to ignore it, and that's where they went wrong. Because ignorance is the greatest gift you can give someone who's there for something greater. That morning, during the first synchronization practice, everyone was lined up, headphones plugged in, eyes alert, weapons simulated. And then came the sound, a hiss in the headphones, like static. Everyone thought it was a system glitch. Everyone took off their headphones except her. She kept them on. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since arriving, she whispered 3 words. "I know this." It was a frequency, not a mistake. A call, a whisper buried in time, a vibration only she seemed to understand, as if the sound were a memory, or a reunion. She stood up in the middle of the drill, turned away from the troops, and began walking. Everyone looked at her. The sergeant shouted. She didn't respond, she didn't hesitate. Her steps had the certainty of someone who had been there before, only no one noticed. If this story has already awakened in you that feeling that something profound is about to happen, watch this video now. Your like helps us keep this kind of narrative alive on the channel, and if you want to follow the full unfolding of this mysterious mission, subscribe now. Your every click strengthens this invisible troop of stories that need to be told. At the base, the most common comment was, "Who is that woman?" But the question they should have been asking was another. Why is she back now? Because this woman had been there before. Maybe not with that face, maybe not with that name, but with that same frequency vibrating in their ears. And no one in that troop seemed ready to understand that. One of the more attentive soldiers began to discreetly follow her through the corridors. He noticed that she always paused for a few seconds in front of the communication room door. He placed his hand on the cold metal and pressed his ear against it, as if hoping to hear something that hadn't yet been transmitted. A frequency, a password, a signal only she could recognize. In the mess hall, she didn't touch her cutlery. She just looked around. She memorized faces, behavior patterns, strategic exit positions, all in silence, all with a cold calculation behind her eyes. She wasn't a rookie, nor a replacement. She was a puzzle that even command didn't want to solve. And at night, when everyone else was asleep, she lay awake, her headphones connected, not to the base channels, but to something no one else had access to, an old signal from a deactivated operation, now gone from official records. The detail. That operation had been shut down, but the code was active again, and the frequency only rang for her. The troops continued to ignore her, continued to mock her, but time was running out, and their mistake wasn't laughing. It was underestimating her, because when the frequency becomes an alarm, they'll realize she wasn't there by chance. She was there because of them, because of something only she knew, something that was buried, until that hissing sound resurfaced in the silence of the headphones. You watched this far because something inside you felt there was more to this story. So comment below, "I heard the sound before the others." That way I'll know I can count on you when the next revelation comes. The moment the first sounds invaded the troops' headsets, the camp seemed to be in complete harmony with the previous silence. No suspicious movement, no unexpected noise. Until that high-pitched, disconnected buzzing, similar to a faulty hiss, slowly began to emerge. Initially, the soldiers exchanged quick glances. Some tapped their own headsets as if trying to adjust something out of alignment, and others simply removed them in irritation, thinking it was just another technical issue. The instructor looked around and gestured with his hand. "Turn it off." One by one, everyone complied, except her. She remained motionless, her eyes half closed, the headphones still firmly in her ears as if that sound weren't a mistake, but a message. It wasn't random, it wasn't a glitch, and it definitely wasn't new to her. While everyone else stopped, she continued, and while everyone else treated the situation as a nuisance, she felt a reconnection, because she knew that frequency, not with her ears, but with her memory. It was like a forgotten code returning from times of darkness. And in that instant, the world slowed down around her. As the wind blew through the dry vegetation and silence fell among her companions, a vivid memory echoed within her, a memory none of them would ever understand. She closes her eyes, takes a deep breath, and for the first time since arriving at the base, she smiles. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of someone who had rediscovered something the world had tried to erase. And that simple gesture of smiling amidst the silent chaos caught the attention of two soldiers nearby, who looked at each other in confusion. How could she smile while everyone was upset? How could she remain calm in the face of a noise that clearly disturbed everyone? But there she stood, standing almost in a trance, as if that sound spoke only to her. And it did, because to everyone else it was just static. To her, it was a signal. The frequency wasn't just any frequency. It had precise pauses, hidden undertones, vibrations that went unnoticed by ordinary ears. It was a memory code embedded in the sound, like a memory of a camouflaged past. A past the troops didn't know. But she knew it. Very well. It was the same sound he heard the day everything changed, the day a mission never reported to the public sealed a fate that should never be reactivated. But there it was, at the base, at the training camp, the frequency that should have been dead, resurrecting. And smiling at her. If anyone asked, she would deny it. If anyone investigated, they would find nothing, because everything that needed to be erased had been buried deep within the system. But no one had counted on the frequency being picked up again. And now, hearing it, her heart wasn't beating in time with the troops. It was beating in time with a hidden past that was about to surface. The sharp sound echoed like a key slowly turning in the lock of a door that should never be opened. She slowly removed the headphones. She opened her eyes and stared at the horizon. She didn't say a word, but inside her, everything screamed. And she knew what was coming next, because a frequency doesn't just happen. It's sent. And when it's sent, something bigger is in motion. She had been activated, even if no one had said it out loud, even if the troops didn't understand, even if command believed it was all just a signal error. She knew. That sound meant only one thing. She was no longer in training, she was on a mission. And even though she still wore her too clean uniform, even though her name still wasn't on the records, even though no one recognized her among the others, there was now a certainty pulsing through every cell in her body. The frequency returned because something had slipped, and she was the only one there prepared to deal with it, because she was trained precisely for the moments that should never happen. The troops didn't know it, but the game had just changed. At that moment, the doubt that had lingered in some soldiers' eyes upon seeing her smile gave way to discomfort. They realized she knew something, that she wasn't some out-of-place rookie. That maybe. She was the reason the training had been moved up, but no one dared ask. No one had the courage to face that gaze that, though calm, carried the weight of someone who had seen more than anyone else there had ever dreamed of facing. She didn't need to explain. The frequency spoke for itself, and only she heard it, because only she was part of it. If you were in her shoes, would you have heard the sound or tuned it out like the others? And what's more, if the frequency was sent to you, what do you think it would be activating within your own story? Answer in the comments. What would you do if you suddenly heard something no one else hears, but that you felt was a call just for you? In the silence amidst the shouts and laughter of the other soldiers, she remained motionless. It wasn't shyness, it was calculation. Every step she took within that camp seemed to be meticulously integrated into a larger plan. While they mocked her silence, she deciphered codes. When they ignored her, she absorbed everything the others missed. It wasn't by chance that she noticed how the captain turned the radio 3 times before speaking. It wasn't by oversight that she realized that night flights always departed 2 minutes after the last shift change. And it was definitely no coincidence that she was looking at the strategic map of the base just as someone entered the room. She knew. She anticipated. She anticipated. No movement escaped her trained eyes. The camp seemed random, but she soon noticed patterns. The arrangement of the tents formed a specific pattern. The type of weaponry tested varied depending on the time of day. Even the behavior of the guard dogs followed a routine. And she, in absolute silence, memorized every detail as if she were assembling a puzzle whose final image was known only to her. She didn't need to write anything down. Her mind functioned like a fail-safe storage device. Every noise, every shadow, every repeated voice was stored in a logical order that revealed something others didn't even know existed. When she walked through the corridors, she avoided direct gaze. Not out of weakness, but out of strategy. Those who don't allow themselves to be read remain impenetrable. While the other soldiers struggled to appear strong, she simply was. Her presence, though silent, caused discomfort. There was something about her that couldn't be explained with words, only with sensations. A trained nose would sense there was more to this woman than her uniform indicated, but no one there seemed to have that instinct. To them, she was just the odd, out-of-place, perhaps even useless rookie. And that was exactly how she wanted them to think. During training, she didn't stand out, but she also didn't make mistakes. She never missed a beat, never lost her rhythm, never showed signs of fatigue. Her cool, almost robotic discipline was interpreted by others as a lack of emotion. But what she hid behind that self-control was a rare gift, the ability to hear what wasn't said, to see what wasn't exposed. When the sound of a ballistics test echoed 2 seconds late, she noticed. When the captain's voice dropped slightly as he mentioned Delta Protocol, she caught it. And when a banal conversation between 2 soldiers ended with a strange gesture toward the communications antenna, she understood that something much larger was being hidden within. One night, while everyone was asleep or pretending to be asleep, she walked slowly to the center of the base. It wasn't recklessness, it was precision. She knew that at that precise time the motion sensors were down for maintenance. She knew that the tower watchman had a habit of dozing for exactly 7 minutes between 3 a.m. and 3:07 a.m., and it was during that interval that she approached the intelligence room's external panel. She didn't touch anything. She just observed. The reflection of the blue light on the doorknob revealed that the internal system had been accessed less than an hour earlier, even though it was officially offline. That confirmed her suspicions, but it wasn't time to act. Not yet. The next morning, she returned to her shadow role. While the others discussed the new training, she analyzed the lieutenant's posture as he commented on the presence of highly classified visitors. No facial expression, not a single word out of protocol, but his eyes. His eyes were trembling. She knew what that meant. Disguised tension, institutionalized deception. Something about that base wasn't as it seemed. And that's precisely why she was there. Her mission wasn't to train with the troops, it was to observe. And she'd observed enough to understand that beneath the surface lay a dark layer of unauthorized operations. Her analysis was so thorough that she realized the ambient sound in the eastern area of the base was artificial. The birds sang too much. The fauna was unnatural. The sound of leaves blowing in the wind repeated the same pattern. This wasn't nature, it was simulation. The surrounding forest, seemingly untouched, hid something that should have looked like wildlife but was actually control in disguise. Who else would have noticed this? No one. because everyone there was too busy trying to fit in or appear strong. Not her. She wanted the truth. When she was seen staring at the map, her reaction was precise. He pretended to look for the weapons room. She made a confused gesture. He smiled slightly and looked away. The soldier who caught her didn't suspect anything, but she knew she'd taken too much of a risk. She needed to accelerate her plan. What she was looking for might be closer than she thought, and the entire base, unbeknownst to her, was participating in something that could change everything. Now tell me in the comments, do you think she is in the service of a shadow government, or that she was sent by someone even more powerful? During the first major nighttime air raid drill, the base went on high alert. Loud sirens echoed through the concrete corridors. Red lights pulsed on the ceiling like the arteries of an organism in a state of emergency. The soldiers lined up at their posts, each with a defined mission, memorized protocols, timed steps. Everything followed an almost ritualistic pattern, except for her, the newcomer, the one no one knew exactly where she came from. While everyone rushed to the defense zones as protocol dictated, she hesitated. She looked around. Her eyes swept over the tense faces and dusty uniforms. She took a deep breath and did the unthinkable. She deviated from her route. It wasn't instinct, it was conviction. She knew what she was doing, even if no one else did. Instead of positioning herself on the front line with the others, she slipped into the shadows of the base's north wing, silently disabled a security camera, and disappeared. 9 minutes. To her superiors, an eternity of disobedience. To her, a precise and calculated window. 9 minutes in which no one else heard what she heard, a frequency almost imperceptible to ordinary ears, but not to hers. In the eyes of the army, she was seriously failing. At 10:41 p.m., her name was struck from the mission efficiency report. At 10:47 p.m., the commander slammed his fist on the table and ordered immediate isolation. No one disrespected the collective plan without consequences. At 10:52 p.m., she reappeared, calm, sweat-free, her uniform intact. She didn't try to justify herself. She didn't open her mouth. She accepted her punishment with a nod. She was sent to the disciplinary wing, 3 days without communication, without access to the radio, without reports, without contact. For most, it was punishment. For her, it was protection. Because what she captured in those 9 minutes couldn't be shared with just anyone. It was an encrypted transmission masked in technical noise like a deliberate glitch, but she recognized it. It was the same code structure she'd heard years before, on another continent, in an operation that doesn't even exist in the records. It was a vocal pattern of 3 tones, followed by silence, then 2 clicks. Whoever sent it knew she would understand. And she did. She just couldn't prove it. Not yet. While the other soldiers saw her as insubordinate, a threat to team cohesion, she carried in her ears the code word to a greater truth. The 9 minutes she spent absent were not about escaping, but about active listening, strategic positioning. She didn't go off the radar out of carelessness, but because she knew that only in absolute silence could she capture what was about to be sent, and it was. A digital whisper hidden amidst the jumble of data, something that would escape any conventional protocol, something that, had she not listened, could have been lost forever. The next day, as she scrubbed the corridors of the punishment wing with a toothbrush, as her punishment required, she smiled. No one understood why. There was no honor in being punished. There was no glory in being discredited. But there was a silent conviction that this apparent failure was, in fact, the first piece on an invisible board beginning to move. A board where every soldier was a predictable pawn, but she was the only awakened queen. The commander watched her through the cameras. He tried to understand. Why would someone so trained act so irresponsibly? Why, among so many choices, would she choose the most solitary and misunderstood path? The answer lay not in military logic, but in what escapes the eyes of those who only see manuals. Because while others were preparing to win a visible war, she was already trying to prevent a war that hadn't yet begun, a war that perhaps not everyone believed was possible, but which she felt approaching like someone hearing thunder long before lightning appears in the sky. On the third night of isolation, a civilian maintenance technician accidentally found a transmission cable with interference near the communications room where she had been before disappearing. When analyzing the data, he found noises that seemed to be patterns. They called in a cryptography expert. Nothing was officially documented, but those who analyzed the signals came back pale. Something strange had happened there. Something that hadn't been recorded in the simulated exercises. Something that shouldn't exist. And yet, she knew before anyone else. Not because she was superior, but because she listened attentively. Because her silence was tactical, and her instincts were trained to pick up on what no one else noticed. What seemed like her flaw was actually her protection. And while the rest of the troop still mocked her behind her back and called her the radio spy, she swept the floor with the calm of someone awaiting a message that only the chosen recognize when it arrives. The truth, sooner or later, emerges. But only those who listen with their souls can recognize it at the exact moment it whispers. Now I want to know, have you ever noticed something that no one else saw but kept quiet because you knew no one would understand? Comment below and share this thought with someone you know who also feels more than others perceive. It was the day he realized no one knew where she came from, that everything began to fall apart within the base itself. Sergeant Farias, a war veteran accustomed to seeing soldiers come and go without explanation, felt for the first time in years something that truly bothered him. Too much silence around that newly arrived soldier. It wasn't just her quiet demeanor, the sidelong glances, or the way she always seemed to know a little more than she should. It was the fact that, in the base files, in the movement reports, on the entry forms, and even in the training rosters, her name simply didn't exist. Not in old versions, not in drafts, not in footnotes. The only thing there was a stamped authorization coming directly from the top with the initials NV-17 in red, and nothing else. As if she had been inserted out of nowhere, like a ghost made official by the system itself. Farias wasn't the conspiratorial type. He'd seen too many absurd things throughout his career to be fazed by administrative mysteries. But this was different. Even intelligence agents had encrypted records. Even undercover agents came with a layered chain of protocols. But she didn't. Her absence was so artificial it seemed deliberate. And if there's one thing the sergeant knew how to recognize, it was when someone was trying to hide something right in the middle of the visible. So he started digging. He started discreetly, asking the other platoon commanders, cross-referencing arrival dates with activity reports, recalling behind-the-scenes conversations. Nothing. Everyone remembered the moment she showed up, but no one could remember where she came from. One said he thought she was from the Northern Unit. Another mentioned something about an urgent transfer, but no one had any proof. It was as if they had implanted memories, or worse, as if they'd been programmed not to ask. That's when Farias made the decision that would seal his fate. Using his old access to the central system, a permission that should have been revoked months ago but mysteriously remained active, he entered the main terminal in the early hours of the morning. He searched the base's entry logs for the past 30 days. Nothing. No registered transport, no similar names, no cross-authorizations with her name. Just that same, solitary document with the acronym NV-17. It was like a password without an owner, an order without an origin, a seal without a sender. He then made the fatal mistake. He tried to search the command center database, exceeding the authorized security level. Not out of ambition, but out of instinct, and it was this move that triggered the silent alarm. The next morning, the operations general, who rarely came down from the command tower, appeared at the base. With him were two men no one knew, no insignia, no identification. They said they were there merely to conduct a security review. But Farias understood. His password was revoked, his locker was emptied, his belongings confiscated. Without explanation, he was informed that he was being reassigned indefinitely for reasons of operational incompatibility. No leave of absence, no chance to defend himself. His colleagues, accustomed to obedience, avoided even looking in his direction. No one said a word. And when he asked directly who had authorized this, he heard the phrase he would never forget. "You are not authorized to question anything related to NV-17. As he was led away from the base, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The soldier was standing near the watchtower, her hands behind her back. She didn't smile. She showed no emotion. She just watched him from afar. But there was something in that look, something he recognized all too well. It wasn't contempt. It was control. It was as if she already knew he would do all this, as if she'd left clues just to see how far he would dare to push, and he pushed too far. As he was shoved into the jeep, he looked back for the last time, hoping to understand. But there was no answer. Only the echo of the acronym that now hammered in his mind like an indecipherable code. NV-17. What did that mean? Who had allowed it? Who above him had so much power to erase a sergeant with 23 years of service with just a signature? The question now wasn't who she was. The question was, what was she doing there? And why did she need absolute silence around her? Farias knew what was happening was bigger than any operation he'd ever witnessed. Because if someone like her needed to be deployed with a phantom clearance and no history, something was about to happen that required under-the-radar agents. But why? And why now? Now tell me this. If you were Sergeant Farias, how far would you go to uncover the truth? Would you have the courage to question the leadership, even knowing you could be erased from history in seconds? Comment below. What would you do if you found an authorization that no one dares explain? The frequency was clearer now, more intense, more precise, as if it had gained its own consciousness and called out to her directly. It was no longer just white noise or an incomprehensible hiss that could be dismissed as interference. It was almost purposeful, organized, encoded. She listened to the sound like someone listening to a familiar beat, a dormant auditory memory, waiting only for the right password to reveal itself. Most soldiers would have ignored it. Most wouldn't even have noticed the difference. But she wasn't like most. She had been trained to recognize what others ignore, to interpret patterns invisible to the naked eye. And now there was a name, a code, 3 letters and 2 numbers, G17K. That was what the voice repeated, always in the same tone, in the same sequence, as if trying to hypnotically capture her attention. And it worked. She wrote down the code mentally. She didn't need paper, she never had. Her mind worked like a radar. It absorbed, cross-referenced data, discarded the useless, and stored what truly mattered. And now more than ever it mattered. G17K wasn't just a name, it was a direction, a clue, a coordinate, inside the base itself. What seemed impossible began to take shape. She picked up a tactical map of the area during the early hours of the morning while everyone slept. She circled the area corresponding to the acronym with her finger. It was an old part of the base, abandoned, officially decommissioned. But she knew, decommissioned places hide the most truths. The trail there was silent. No guards, no cameras working. Strange. Everything was too quiet, as if someone wanted that area to be forgotten. But forgetting was a weakness she didn't harbor. As she approached, she noticed that the old warehouse was overgrown with brush. Dry branches, dust, the smell of accumulated time. And yet, there was something that didn't fit, a disturbed patch of earth, slightly sunken in. She knelt, pressed her ear to the ground. The frequency still whispered, louder there. As if guiding her movements, she dug with her bare hands, quickly, precisely, until she felt something hard. A metal box wrapped in old military fabric. The hinges were rusty but intact. Opening it, she found a radio, not one of those modern ones. It was a field transmitter used decades ago, and even with age it was intact, clean, functional, as if it had been left there not to be forgotten, but to be found. She turned on the device. The frequency returned immediately. But now it wasn't just the code. It was a voice, firm, direct, masculine, familiar. She froze. She recognized that timbre. It was impossible. The speaker was dead. She was sure of it. The burial had been secret, but she had been there. She had seen the body. She had wept silently as the casket was lowered. And yet now that same voice called her name. Not her current name, but the name she had used before the mission. The name that had been erased from the files. That only someone on the inside knew. The radio crackled and said, You took your time. I knew you would come, but you still took your time. I hope you're ready. And then, silence. She didn't know if it was delusion, a trap, or a glitch in time. But one thing was certain. It was no coincidence. Someone had left that radio there for her. Someone who knew every detail of her past. Someone who knew what she was looking for, and that someone wanted her to keep going. The base hid more than just weapons. It hid stories, erased names, operations that never made it to paper. And she, perhaps unknowingly, was part of it all, long before she set foot there. G17K was just the beginning. The trail was set, and she could never go back. Now stop and think. What would you do if a voice from your past called you by a name everyone has forgotten? If someone who should be dead spoke to you from a place where nothing should work? Would you obey the call? Or would you bury the radio back and pretend nothing happened? Tell me in the comment, would you follow the frequency or turn off the transmitter forever? She shouldn't have been alive. But she was. And that in itself was a problem no one on that military base was prepared to face. Her name wasn't in recent records, but for those who knew where to look, for those familiar with the missions buried beneath layers of official silence, a simple acronym, NV-17, carried the weight of a past the government pretended didn't exist. She was part of a unit so secret that not even the active duty soldiers believed it had ever been real. A team of ghosts, trained to disappear, to carry out orders that would never be recorded, to die without a trace. And somehow, against all odds, she not only survived, she returned. 12 years earlier, the last communication from Unit NV-17 was a warning signal from a dense jungle, marked only as Zone E3 on tactical maps. The transmission cut off abruptly. Officially, everyone was presumed dead in an ambush. Unofficially, some whispered that the mission should never have happened. That they had discovered something they shouldn't have, that the enemy wasn't external. Since then, the survivors, if there were any, have vanished. And now, in the heart of this new operational base, she walked again in official uniform, her face neutral with no visible scars, no medical history, no ties. Just a sealed document signed by someone high up, granting her immediate access. That was enough to silence her superiors. But not the watchful eyes that still remembered the acronym NV-17 like a forbidden echo. She didn't say much, but she observed everything. She recognized within her first 72 hours at the base patterns that shouldn't have been there. The 3-minute rotation of night watchmen, the silent transmission on frequency 74.6 during weapons tests, the smell of ozone near the west antenna, the same one she remembered from the night of the NV-17 attack. This wasn't paranoia. It was strategic déjà vu. It was the past flashing before her eyes again. And anyone who's faced the kind of mission that never existed knows exactly when something's about to explode again. What no one there knew, or pretended not to know, is that she hadn't returned by chance. She hadn't been sent to learn, to train, or to reinforce the contingent. She was there because the pattern repeated itself, because the kind of silence that precedes chaos was ingrained in the base's routine. Because the small deviations from protocol that everyone ignored were, in fact, glaring signs to anyone who'd seen a massacre unfold from within. And she had. She was the only one who knew the truth about what happened to NV-17. And now, it was all starting over again. A soldier watched her pause for exactly 12 seconds before the tactics board for the nearby operation. 12 seconds doesn't seem like much. But for someone trained in the rhythm of war, it's enough time to read, memorize, identify inconsistencies, and form a hypothesis. She saw a red mark that didn't make sense on the evacuation plan, the same mark that had been drawn years ago on the map of Zone E3. Coincidence? There's no such thing as coincidence in the kind of warfare she was trained for. Only repetition, only error disguised as strategy. And someone was about to repeat that mistake again, perhaps by choice, perhaps by sabotage. But now she was alive, and she wouldn't let it happen again. During the night, she returned to the base's old, abandoned warehouse. Nobody goes there. The motion sensors don't work properly in that area, but she knew how to slip past. Beneath a rusted metal plate, she dug with her hands until she found what she'd buried years ago, a military-grade radio, shielded by camouflage fabric and lead shielding. When she turned it on, it wasn't surprising that it worked. What was surprising was the voice that answered. Code NV17 recognized. Channel secure. Are you alone? The voice. That voice. It belonged to someone she swore she'd seen die. In that instant, everything changed. She now knew she wasn't alone. Someone else had survived. Someone else realized the pattern was repeating itself. The base wasn't just a training ground. It was a stage set, just as before. And once again, she was the displaced piece, the unforeseen factor, the variable the strategists couldn't eliminate. There was no need to say anything else. The breathing on the other end of the line said it all. They knew. They were watching. And they wanted her out of the way, but she didn't come to back down. She came to finish what she started. Comment below, if you discovered you survived something that never should have happened, would you keep it a secret or seek justice? The moment the evacuation siren sounded, something inside her clicked. While the other soldiers ran for the trucks, following the order to retreat due to an internal biological threat, she walked in the opposite direction, with calculated steps, like someone who already knew what was about to happen. No one questioned her. No one noticed. After all, she was just the strange soldier, the one who never said much, the one who always seemed detached from everything, as if playing a side game while the rest was still learning the basic rules of the board. But in that moment, she held something no one else had, the original recording of the noise, the same sound that weeks before had been dismissed by everyone as a technical glitch. Only now she knew what was behind it, and she needed everyone to know, even if it was too late. Before the vehicles left the base perimeter, she approached the communications center. No one saw her connecting the internal audio channel to the troops' headsets. No one noticed when she activated the single transmission. Within 5 seconds, every soldier heard the high-pitched, familiar, annoying sound. But there was something different this time. There was rhythm, pauses, structure, a code. Those who really paid attention realized it wasn't interference. It was a language. It was Morse code. And she knew that, at least among the veterans, someone still remembered how to decipher it. The silence of the troops, which had settled immediately after the sound began, became a weight in the air. And then the message began to be translated. The danger is within. They are not who they say they are. The soldier responsible for convoy security stopped breathing for a second. He repeated the translation aloud. Then, more quietly, as if he couldn't believe it. Internal. Attack! The radio trembled in his hand. He looked up at the top of the tower where the commanders were gathered. Something didn't add up. Protocol dictated that, in the event of a biological threat, senior officers would be evacuated first. But they were still there, as if waiting, watching. And then instinct took over. He ordered everyone to remain in position. Total silence. No one entered. No one left. In the control room, a general watched everything through the cameras. And when he saw that the troops had stopped because of the recording, he smiled, cold, menacing. He turned to the other man beside him and said, "She activated the audio. We knew it would be her." The other responded with only a nod and pressed a red button on an ancient console. Within seconds, all the cameras shut down, and the base plunged into electronic shadow. No communication was going out. None was coming in. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. The soldier standing in the middle of the courtyard waited. She knew that from then on everything would change, and evacuation wasn't the real plan. It was a purge. The noise, disguised as a malfunction, was a hidden cry for help, and only someone with a history in NV17 would understand the reference. The group she belonged to, the group that officially never existed. That was declared dead over a decade ago. But she survived. And with her, a mission that now resurfaced, to neutralize the silent infiltration that was corroding the armed forces from within. The superiors. They weren't superiors. They were pawns, undercover agents, and the base was the final control point. If they took it, the next phase would begin, a phase no real soldier would allow to happen. The sergeant who had been dismissed days earlier for over-investigating appeared at the gate, in uniform, even though it wasn't protocol. Someone had let him in. He carried a decoding case. When he connected the equipment to the original sound of the noise, what emerged was even more alarming. Exact coordinates, target names, times, and the final signature, NV-17 active. The alert wasn't just a warning, it was a call, a silent summons, for those who still knew where they were standing. For those who understood that real war is never declared, it begins silently, disguised as routine, hidden behind official orders that mask destruction as obedience. And as chaos approached, and the base's lights flickered as if a power outage were imminent, she looked to the horizon, not as someone fearful, but as someone who had waited too long to act. Everything was unfolding just as it had in the report she'd read in 2013, a report that, according to the archives, had been destroyed. But she'd memorized every line, and now line by line it was being fulfilled before everyone's eyes. Only this time she wouldn't be the only one to hear the noise. This time the entire troop would hear it. And if you'd had your headphones on at that moment, what would you have done when you recognized that the enemy wasn't on the other side of the border, but sitting right next to you? Write in the comments. Would you have followed the evacuation? Or would you have decoded the noise? She took center stage with the calm of someone who had survived their own hell. While the others were still trying to understand the chaos that had wreaked havoc on the base, she was already devising a new plan. Not because someone had appointed her commander, but because no one else seemed capable of maintaining their sanity while everything was falling apart. The alarms were no longer ringing. The tower lights were off. The white radio sound had ceased, and in this artificial silence she moved with surgical precision. There was no room for hesitation. Every second was a sentence. What began as a routine simulation had revealed itself to be a game of manipulation on a military scale. The base wasn't just a training center, it was a control pod, a laboratory with human beings in the form of soldiers. And most perversely, none of them knew it. From the beginning, she noticed the details no one else saw. The late medical exams, the dreams some soldiers had been reporting, all with the same symbols. The food was always over-seasoned, as if masking something. The frequency sensors in the dormitories, everything pointed to something bigger, something beyond the scope of national defense. And now the complete map was in her hands. Fragments of decoded files, listened to on nights of vigil, cross-referenced with orders coming from sectors not even the highest-ranking officers knew about. The project's name, Operation Icarus. Objective, to induce neurological control via frequency radio waves. Result, an army that would obey orders before even understanding them. Her first decision was to rescue the dismissed sergeant. He had been the only one to suspect her origins, and so he had been silenced. Not fired, not arrested, but isolated in a makeshift cell in the basement of the base. The official version was that he had deserted. The reality was that he knew too much. And now, upon being freed by her, he immediately understood what was at stake. There was no time for emotional explanations. Only action. They knew what to do. She had already prepared escape routes, disabled strategic sensors, and implanted reversion codes in the base's internal systems. Every step she had taken in the last few days was not one of suspicion, it was one of counterattack. The operation's commanders, figures who rarely appeared before, were now exposed. They weren't from the traditional army hierarchy. They were contractors from military biotechnology companies, suited men who walked around with encrypted badges and avoided any contact with the soldiers. But now, they were in a panic. The doors began to fail. The data they exclusively controlled began to leak through the mess hall screens. Secret files projected onto the walls as if they were part of a science fiction film. It was her. She had released the information from the prison where it was locked. The soldiers began to awaken, literally, as if something inside them had been disconnected. Previously, robotic behaviors began to give way to doubt, memory, and emotion. One by one, they remembered episodes that had been erased. They remembered missions that were not recorded in any report. They remembered the causeless fear and the orders without origin. She gathered them in the central courtyard. Her gaze didn't ask for trust. It commanded. Not with authority, but with authority. The difference was that she knew what she was doing, while the others simply followed orders. The moment to escape was now, but she knew they would try to stop her. That's why days before she had sabotaged external communications. Nothing was going out. No requests for backup, no satellite contact, no drones flying overhead. All they had was their own arrogance, and that would be their undoing. The emergency response team, which would arrive in case of invasion or mutiny, was never activated, and even if it had been, she had already implanted false protocols in the system. Reinforcements would receive incorrect coordinates. They would be sent to a ghost base in the desert. There would be no backup, there would be no salvation for the commanders. With the sergeant at her side, she led those ready to leave. Others still hesitated, in shock, unable to comprehend what had been taken from them. But time was running out, and she couldn't wait for everyone. They climbed through tunnels that had been sealed decades ago, passages built during the Cold War and forgotten by subsequent generations. They exited through the west hatch, covered by a false satellite dish. When they saw the light of day, many fell to their knees, not from emotion, but because their bodies were still relearning freedom. She looked back just once, not out of nostalgia, but to mentally capture the image of the structure that had once symbolized authority and which was now nothing more than a high-tech prison. Deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. A system like this doesn't die with a power outage. It adapts, it hides, and tries again. That's why she needed to go further. She needed to expose it. She needed to alert the world to what was really being tested on Brazilian soil. And now, after all this, tell me one thing. If you discovered you were unknowingly used as a guinea pig, would you have the courage to do what she did? Or would you continue to follow orders without ever asking who's really in charge? Comment below what you would do. Perhaps your answer reveals more about you than you imagine. She walks through the forest as if she no longer belongs to the ordinary world. Her footsteps make no sound, her breathing is steadied, and her gaze carries something few would be able to sustain for more than 5 seconds. Her torn and dirty uniform contrasts with the straight posture of someone who has just won an invisible but brutal battle. In her hand, the ancient radio, covered in rust and the marks of time, vibrates with a strange frequency. A high-pitched, intermittent sound, like the heart of a secret trying to escape. She stops, presses the button. Silence. Then a new sequence of clicks emerges. It's not interference, it's code, it's a call. NV-17 still lives. Behind her, the sounds of the collapsing base still echo in the distance. But she doesn't turn around. She doesn't need to. Her mission wasn't to save the base or the soldiers. Her mission was much greater. It was to ensure the truth didn't die along with the files that burned in the tunnels below ground. The truth about what Project G17K really was, about the voices on the forgotten frequency, and about the orders that were never recorded, only whispered in nighttime meetings that aren't recorded in any reports. As she walks, flashes of the past mingle with the present. The ambush that destroyed her former troop, the lie of the symbolic funeral, the hiding place in the years that followed, living in the shadow of forged documents. And now, the return, the infiltration under another identity. Silence as armor, the steady gaze as a weapon. She remembers the face of the sergeant who suspected her, the Morse code message recorded in the last audio, the frequency that everyone found faulty, except her, because she recognized the pattern, recognizable the source, because she herself helped create that frequency. She was trained to decipher it, to use it as a direct line between the survivors of something that should never have existed. The radio crackles again, and this time the voice is clear, a voice she hasn't heard in over a decade. NV-17, code green, protocol meeting in hidden zone, negative tracking, confirmation? She closes her eyes. A tear falls, but not from emotion, from memory, for all she sacrificed, for the blood shed on foreign soil, for the guilt she carried, and for the certainty that the real war hasn't even begun yet. She responds with the code no one else knows, a code buried among the NV-17 troops' records. The radio emits a confirmation tone. A new coordinate is revealed. She smiles, but it's not one of relief, it's one of preparation, because what she discovered inside that base was only the surface layer, the hidden notes, the maps with markings outside the territory, the encrypted files that showed there was more than one base, more than one experiment, and more than one survivor. The forest begins to lighten. On the horizon, a red dot flashes. An unidentified helicopter hovers above the trees. She quickens her pace. She enters a clearing where an underground structure appears abandoned, but as she approaches, a sensor activates. The door opens. She descends. The radio goes silent. The frequency changes. And a new transmission begins. Voices, plans, activation protocols. A world that lives in the shadows reappears in full force. The NV-17 troop isn't dead. It just fell silent until now. What you've seen so far was just the surface. The first breath of a truth much deeper, much more dangerous and much closer than anyone imagines. This soldier wasn't the only one sent, and the war she prevented from exploding at base G-17K was just a test. If this ending touched you, if something inside you senses there's more behind these transmissions, leave a like to show you're ready to continue this journey. Subscribe to the channel now because in the next video, we'll reveal the secret hidden inside the capsule marked with the NV-17 symbol. An object she took with her, and which carries the activation message for what will be the true beginning of the final mission. Are you ready to discover what no one has dared to decipher? Then turn on notifications and wait. The next frequency is already being broadcast. You just need to be ready to listen.